So our scripture reading today is not the one listed in the bulletin. It's actually Mark 12, verses 41 to 44. He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." The word of the Lord for the people of God.
Thanks, Sarah, for that song. They didn't clap, but I wanted to. But it was really wonderful, so thank you. I know it's kind of controversial whether we clap and worship and stuff like that, but there are moments when it just feels like the right response because it's a way of joyfully acknowledging the gifts of someone, so thank you. You know, it's been kind of interesting. I've been thinking about spirituality a lot recently, and not surprising given what I do, but I've been thinking about this concept of a spiral. You know, it's sort of like in our lives, we have an issue that touches and it goes around and we kind of get an understanding of it. And then something happens and it's like it drops down a deeper level, right? And then something else happens and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And it seems to be God's way that we don't always get hit with all the wisdom and insight we need at one time. In fact, it would be kind of devastating if that happened, wouldn't it? Because we'd be so shocked sometimes by the things that we need to learn or the behaviors that we need to change. And God in God's grace just seems to allow us to touch that. We live out that new reality, and then it goes to a deeper level as something new triggers something else, and we get a deeper and deeper insight. And that continues over our whole lifetime. And I've been really kind of pondering this because I've just been sort of thinking about my own relationship to how I understand issues of hunger. You know, I grew up for many years in a fairly affluent middle-class family. I didn't have to think about this at all. And in college, you know, I was sort of the young activist, but hunger really wasn't on my radar. It was more like saving the world. But it wasn't until I landed in Berkeley as a second career pastor, well into my 40s, that suddenly it became my responsibility on staff to be the front line with all the homeless people that showed up on our doors of our church. And there were a lot of them. Because in Berkeley, just around the corner from our church, was huge homeless encampments in places called People's Park, where the free speech movement started years before. And there was just a huge social service community and all this kind of stuff. And our church held a homeless meal once a month. Every week on Tuesday nights, we held a suitcase clinic by the University of California at Berkeley that had all these graduate students that would offer medical help, legal advice, eye exams or feet exams, all sorts of stuff for the homeless. But my job was really just to touch those individual people that would come in asking for help. And I got to know folks, and we distributed lots of stuff to them. In fact, our church, every year through what you would call your pastor's benevolence fund, distributed somewhere between $45,000 and $65,000 in gifts to the homeless and to people in our community that were in need, including people in our congregation who, in economic bad times, might have needed a mortgage payment to keep their house from going under, all sorts of stuff. But you know what? I had a lot of things to do in that season. Nothing ever kept me up at night thinking about the homeless. I did my job, I was compassionate, I learned a little bit about it, but I really didn't think about the underlying systemic issues of poverty or hunger, but I did understand housing shortage. And that's kind of where I was on that spiral, that first go round. And that got a little deeper. But then I went to my next church, and they had an active hunger ministry. They were involved in food pantry and collecting food, not unlike how this church was. But I was only the interim there, so I let the mission people sort of do that, and I kind of put my hand out there, and I was for it, all that, but I really didn't know much really about the underlying issues. And even when I was called here, I was excited that you guys had this signature ministry, but I really didn't. I kind of had ideas about how to do mission, but I wasn't really sure. And when I first started, there were so many other things I had to attend to. I was like, okay, I'll let Serve take care of that. And then when Barb came, it's like, I'll let Barb take care of that. And I'm just going to keep doing all the other stuff until last fall. Another point on this spiral. And that's when suddenly the SEM food pantry was going to have to leave our property. All of a sudden, God got my attention in a new way. The things that I had known or thought about, I just really wasn't kind of aware of them, kind of had some idea. And then all of a sudden, it was like Serve was asking us, is this our signature ministry for our church? Is this really what we're supposed to be about? Session had to wrestle with that, Serve had to wrestle with that, and suddenly I needed to be wrestling with that. And while it didn't keep me awake at night, it sort of went to the top of my prayer list. And I was like, I got to pray about this. I got to really listen for what God is saying and doing if we're going to either move into this ministry with some more depth and commitment, or are we going to step back and say, is God calling us to do something else? And as you know from the announcements that have been made, the session really did step into that. Serve stepped into that. And out of that, I developed this sermon series, 8 weeks on hunger. And now I began to be awake at night. Because as I started doing the research on global issues of hunger, when I started looking at hunger in the United States, when I began looking at what's going on right here in Ohio and then right here in Cincinnati, all of a sudden I found myself looking at this issue in a completely different way. What are the underlying systemic issues? What is it that we're called to do? What are we called to offer? How are we supposed to respond? What are the things that we're doing really well and we keep needing to do and lift up? And then where are the places that God may be leading us to go even deeper in our commitment to alleviating hunger and poverty right here in our county? I remember walking into Kroger a few weeks ago and just being overwhelmed with wondering what it would be like if I walked into the grocery store every time and I was anxious. Because you see, people who are dealing with food scarcity, the grocery store is not their friend. It's a place for them to worry. They're not sure if the funds that they have or the government assistance they have will be enough to feed their family or take care of the needs that they have. And that came home to me when Barb, just a few weeks ago, when talking about the bonus item of laundry detergent, said, this is not covered by SNAP funds. And when she posed the question, if you had to feed your family or clean your clothes, which would you do? And I found myself going, I've never thought about it that way. All of a sudden, I'm awake at night thinking about what would it be like, not day after day or for a short season, but week after week, month after month, year after year, to think about food insecurity as a major issue in my life. I had never sort of tried to have empathy at that level. And I began to ask, what is it that I can offer? What is it that we as a church can offer? How do I lean into this differently? Well, in my very ordered way of thinking about things, I started thinking about how I give my money differently. How could I designate? And I thought opened my planner and I went, on this day I could do the full mobile food pantry, and on this day I could help with this, that, and the other. And yet, I wasn't quite sure I was ready to sort of pull myself all the way into that pit with people who may be really dealing with food scarcity. And then I read the story of the widow's mite. You know, widows in the first century are an interesting group of people. They didn't have government assistance back in that day, but the religious organizations did. And there were all sorts of rules that said if someone is widowed, God has a way to provide for them. There were family laws about who is supposed to give, and there were even religious things that were supposed to happen, that were supposed to guarantee that a widow would not be left in abject poverty. And yet, as Jesus says here in Mark and also in other places, he condemns the religious leaders who find a loophole so that people can get out of supporting the widows in their families and in their communities. And right before this passage where Jesus is teaching, he's actually condemned the scribes and Pharisees who are in the temple and they're making their big generous gifts, and he says they make them on the backs of the widows whose homes they have taken, whose provision they have shattered. And then the story, as we heard today, Jesus is sort of stepping back and he's just observing on the Temple Mount what's kind of going on, as he often does, and wants to make a comment about it. Well, let's envision what it looked like on the Temple Mount. There was a big portico called the place where the women worshiped. There was a Gentile court, there were other courts, but in front of this court of the women's worship space, which was the only space that women could go into on the old Temple Mount, was a place where there were 13 horns. And they were sort of like these big, receptacles. And people came in and they put their coins down inside of these horns. Mary said that, they sort of marched and sort of came in. And it was really a big show because if you had a lot of coins, what kind of sound do you think that made? Right? It called attention to yourself. In fact, Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, specifically says, when you give your alms, don't blow your horn. And reference to these horns, because sometimes, in addition to these receptacles that you're putting all these coins, like a coin changer machine, think about that for a second, how loud that is. People would actually blow a horn if you were a big giver. It was like, call attention to me, look at me. Whoa, I'm putting all my coins in there. And yet Jesus calls out this woman who has 2 little, teeny, tiny, insignificant coins. In fact, a widow's mite, I actually have one. I forgot to bring it this morning. I have one from an archaeological dig in Israel that I have. It's less than the size of my baby fingernail. It's this little teeny tiny bit of a coin. It has almost no weight to it. And this widow, who Jesus has, just as a class, has been talking about how the religious leadership have made a loophole so that she doesn't have to be supported, puts these 2 little itty bitty, almost, they would not make any noise, coins into one of those horns. And Jesus calls out that her sacrifice was more than all the wealth of the wealthy, because she was giving out of everything she had. When we're called to offer ourselves for the sake of God's justice and mission in the world, what are we called to give? In the example of this woman, there is a sense that she is going to give it all to God's work. She's not going to hold back. It's a sacrificial giving that she wants to do. And in my experience of working with those in the various years I've had of people who are poor, they are often among the most generous because they're willing to give for the sake of what's in front of them and trust that when it's their turn, somehow there will be provision made for them. The story challenged me and made me wonder, was I really giving in a way that actually kind of was sacrificial? Did it really make a difference one way or the other, whether I gave a little bit of my time or a little bit of my money to this particular cause? And then fast forward to last Thursday. So last Thursday was one of those horrible days in the office where I had a list so long to do. I actually wore jeans to the office and planned to lock myself in my office so no one would need to see me, except that by 3:30 in the afternoon, I hadn't gotten anything done. I'd been pulled into more meetings, and all I wanted to do was write the beacon, get the session agenda out, at least the top 2 things done before I left. And so I finally kicked everybody. I said, forget it. I'm going to close the door. I'm not going to talk to anybody else. I have so much to get done. And I was on my way to get a cup of coffee when I passed by Allison, who was talking on the intercom to somebody who had come to the church. And I thought, oh, she's just letting somebody in. But as I walked past her, it was clear that the person on the other end of that intercom was not just asking to be buzzed in. And in fact, they were telling a very long story. And I went, oh my gosh. We've got somebody who has some need going on, and I thought, oh, bother, Allison can handle it. And then I thought, no, she can't. I need to handle this. And between that little space in the office and the front door, if you'd heard my inner world, my inner dialogue was muttering. I have so much to do, I have so much to do, this is going to take too much time, this is going to be a blah. Hi, how are you? My name's Debbie, I'm the pastor. But as I sat down and began to, and I'll call him Bill, it's not really his name, sat down in the gathering room and just tumbled out this story. And I took a breath and I thought, I just need to be present for him. Forget about all the things that I have to do right now. The most important thing I can give him is just my full on attention. And the story kept going on and on because there are just layers and layers and layers of all the reasons why he found himself outside our door on Thursday afternoon. And eventually he got to the point and he said, what I really need is a bus ticket. I have a job in Florida. He said, last night I spent the night outside, and you remember that was our negative like 15, 22 night. He said, I'm lucky I didn't die. He said, I just need a little bit of help. I don't know if you or any other churches, I just am so desperate I had to try something. So we brought Bill into the office, and the first thing we did was give him a cup of coffee. His hands were so cold. When I shook his hand, I was just aware of just how absolutely almost frozen his fingers were, just to give him a chance to warm up. Then we got in touch with his friend in Florida, because I wanted to make sure that we weren't just transferring one problem from Cincinnati to Panama City, Florida. And his friend is there as a contractor, something that Bill had told me he had expertise in. And Bill told me, yeah, I've got work for him. He just needs to get here. And then Bill kept saying to me, but I want to work. I want to do something. I don't want you just to give me something. I realized in addition to the presence that we offered in the cup of coffee, giving him some dignity at this moment might be a good thing. And so I went down the hall and said, hey, Claire, is there anything that you can do? And Christian, who is our sort of resident remodeling guy around here, was just finishing up for the day. And they were sitting in there, and I said, okay, hey, is there anything that we can give this guy to do? I said, Christian, are you finished? Can he help you with any of the construction stuff? He has some background. Christian had that look on his face like, I was about to leave, and now you're giving me something else to do? Claire gave me, you've got to be kidding. You want me to let some guy we've never met run around the property? But they both just took a breath, said, okay, let's figure something out. Bill ended up doing some work for Christian, went off and helped him clean up. He did some stuff for Claire, and in the meantime, Allison, who all day had been waiting for that list of things that I needed to finish so she could finish her work, I had to say to her, hey, Allison, can you research bus tickets? I don't know how to get from here to Panama City, which is really actually more complicated than you imagine. And she stopped her work and ended up giving about 45 minutes of time to sorting all of this out. In the meantime, Bill is doing some stuff around the church. We're trying to get this all done, and Christian walks into me and he says, hey, Debbie, is it okay if I offer him a coat? I have a coat in my van. Is that okay with you? Sure, Christian. Offer what you have. Then they come in, they get the tickets all done, which is a mess because Bill's lost his ID and you can't get on a bus without an ID, and Allison spends even more time figuring out the solution. But finally, Bill leaves with hugs to us, feeling like he's made a friend, feeling like somehow God had presented angels to him to help him get where he needed to go. We were able to offer what we had. And right about that time, I'm leaving, and Christian was packing his truck, and I said, so Christian, did you end up giving him the coat? And he says, no, but I did give him a pack of cigarettes. And I thought, wow, we offer what we have, don't we? We offered presence. We offered a small bit of provision. We offered some of our very precious time. We offered a chance for dignity, for him to feel like he was contributing to our community. And yes, folks, we offered a pack of cigarettes. You know, God has given us just the right amount of gifts to do the work that God's called us to do. It took all of us that afternoon in the office to offer what we could to help this young man. And as a church, God has given all of us the gifts that we need to be able to respond to the invitation to help those who may be hungry. When I made that trek between the office and the front door, muttering under my breath, the one word that kept coming back to me was something that Jill Brokaw said last week. If Jesus showed up, would you give him something to eat? I wasn't quite there yet, but I was like, if Jesus shows up, will I open the door? That's what we're called to be as a church. We've been given enough. Just offer what we have. It starts with a door, a conversation, a nudge. And as we were invited in, the change in my attitude was transformational. All of us left that afternoon feeling like we had done something small. Maybe, as Mother Teresa said, we hadn't fed 100, but we'd at least cared for the one who God brought to our door. May that be true for all of us. Amen.